let's get to the meat of this podcast. The Utah Jazz, or the Brooklyn Nets, came to an agreement in a meeting with Kevin Durant earlier this week, apparently. Alex, do you just want to give me the details on what happened here with Kevin Durant and the ownership, front office, coaching staff of the Brooklyn Nets?
Yeah, they 2 weeks after Kevin Durant told Joe Tsai in London before attending a Travis Scott concert with James Harden, he wanted to have Steve Nash and Sean Marks fired if he were to stay. Those parties sat down again in Los Angeles. A lot of frequent flyer miles for Kevin Durant, Joe Tsai and co. past few weeks, and they sat down with Joe's wife Clara as well, Sean Marks, Steve Nash, and agreed to go forward. This was released in a tweet Monday with the Nets logo and Kevin Durant's boardroom logo right next to it, which has been interesting to some people. And now here we are. We're about a month from, I think Nets Media Day is a month from tomorrow. And now it's the Biggie Three of Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and Ben Simmons, with what I think is a pretty deep team around them. You have three shooters in Joe Harris, Patty Mills, Seth Curry. Do we see a trade for one of them given the redundancy in the coming weeks? Nick Claxton and Day'Ron Sharpe are their lone bigs. There was a report yesterday linking them to Tristan Thompson. Royce O'Neal, speaking of the Utah Jazz, who they traded a first-round pick for. All of a sudden, this team, I'm missing one other person, but all of a sudden, this team's 10 deep is pretty dang good, assuming they can coexist, stay healthy, etc. So, I think the kumbaya was more or less the Nets weren't willing to trade Kevin for anything less than, an all-star or two back and a bevy of picks. They didn't want to rebuild. They can't really because of the Houston situation with James Harden and that trade. And I think both sides kind of looked around a bit and realized this was sticking together was the best option for each other.
Yeah. I have kind of been a proponent of this Nets roster for a while now. Like, I think you can go back. I think in our first conversation earlier this offseason about this, like, I literally said, I kind of sneaky love this Nets roster and think they're actually good. Look, this is so dependent on what Ben Simmons can be, right? If Ben Simmons can come back, be the Ben Simmons that we've seen previously, defensive stopper, at times primary, probably more secondary ball handler that also kind of morphs into a screener and, fills all of the gaps and all of the holes around Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. All of their shooting that surrounds Ben Simmons between Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, who are two of the all-time shooters in NBA history, along with Joe Harris and Seth Curry, who are two of the all-time spot-up shooters in NBA history. Obviously, Patty Mills as well. Patty Mills is there.
TJ Warren, nice little reclamation project, potentially.
TJ Warren is a really good, really good project. Obviously, Cam Thomas still exists on this roster. It's a good roster. Royce O'Neal shoots 37% from three. It's a good team. Like, this is an actual good basketball team if Ben Simmons comes in and can be what Ben is capable of. I think they have a chance to win the title. Like, I'm just going to say it. I think they have a real chance to win the title. I don't know, like, they'd be in my top 10, but I think it's wide open enough this year to where being in the top 10 gives you, like a 5% chance to win the title this year, basically. And that's crazy that this thing almost got broken up if Kevin Durant decided that he wanted to leave and they got the right offer, right? Like, at any time in the last couple of months, the Brooklyn Nets could have gotten an offer from a team that made them go, oh shit, like, we kind of got to take that, right? Mm-hmm. We kind of got to move on and move forward. But it didn't come, and because it didn't come, they're in an awesome spot. Like, this is a good team. It could totally blow up, and I could look fucking dumb in, 2 months, right? 3 months once the season starts and they play like shit. But, like, on paper, this is an awesome team, and I'm super excited about the way that all of these pieces fit together.
I essentially wrote the same thing that you just said in both my stories this week. On paper, they look deeply. I would argue on paper, this is the deepest team they've had by far under Steve Nash, and that includes, and we never really got to see this team because of the James Harden trade and Spencer Dinwiddie's injury. You know, their top 10 opening night 2020 was Kyrie, Kevin, Spencer Dinwiddie, Karis LeVert, DeAndre Jordan, Jared Allen, Taurean Prince, Jeff Green, Landry Shamet, Bruce Brown. Like, that's a pretty good 10 deep. But again, we never really got to see what they could be because of the James Harden trade. But they have the 3-and-D wing that they, in Royce O'Neal, that they've been lacking, and it's shown. Ben Simmons is extremely versatile. How they use him is going to be fun. I
thought Joe Harris was a big missing piece last year for them.
Yeah, you know, the Joe Harris arc has been really interesting to me because, you know, he re-signs in that 2019-20 offseason, and all the fans are like, oh, thank God. And then he was the most reliable player in that year full of injuries. He had that amazing game against the Celtics game 2, and then a bunch of people blamed him for the Bucks series loss despite injuries to Harden and Kyrie.
Right.
And then, you know, my Twitter mentioned it full of trade Joe Harris, and then he gets hurt early last season in Oklahoma City, and they clearly missed the spacing given that the non-shooter heavy lineups they were deploying with Nick Claxton, Bruce Brown, DeAndre Bembry at the time, all those guys. And so now it's back to Joe Harris appreciation. I think a lot of credit on two fronts here. In May, he talked about not giving Kyrie a long-term contract or being non-committal and trying to get back to the organization's roots. You know, he stuck to his guns. He risked losing both Kevin and Kyrie. As you said, if the right offer came across the table, he still built the roster expecting to keep everybody. And now he's coming into the season with both guys on board, you know, after some negotiations and whatnot. And now, as you said, they could win the whole thing hypothetically. I am not into the whole, like, let's see where they stack up against Milwaukee, Philly, Boston, all them, because we haven't seen this team play, and I've looked too stupid before with some of this stuff, given all the stuff that's happened here. But
yeah,
given their rotations, given all the different way, you know, some of the rumblings I've heard from, you know, potential free agents and everyone that's met with the Nets, as Steve Nash has talked about changing up the system a bit. I mean, you talk about those 7 seconds or less Suns teams he was on. I mean, they can hurt you so many different ways offensively with this team. We talk about Kevin and Kyrie. You can have multiple ball handlers with Ben and Kyrie. TJ Warren, you know, bubble TJ and before the foot injuries, he's a great mid-range shooter. You saw even at his older age what LaMarcus Aldridge gave them as the mid-range guy last year. They can, and again, all the shooting with Seth, Patty, and Joe with the spacing, they can hurt you so many different ways. But I want to see it first.
I think they're going to have a top 5 offense. Like, I'm not actually real concerned about that. Like, I think
I'd put money on that today.
Offense. Yeah. The question for me is, how do they get stops? Nick Claxton is a developing defender, has a real chance to be good at some point, isn't quite reliable enough yet for what they need, like out of a starting center all the time. Maybe he will be this year. Like, that's a real possibility. Kevin Durant's a good defender, obviously. Ben Simmons is an all-world defender, but all of their perimeter players are below average to average outside of Royce O'Neal. And I'm a little bit worried that this could turn into like a Utah Jazz situation without Rudy Gobert, where, like, you know, you have Kyrie, you have Patty Mills, you have Seth Curry, you have Joe Harris. None of these guys are particularly fleet of foot or big. And it could just end up being a situation where it's just like a revolving door toward the rim. And Ben is just like constantly trying to like sag off of his guy and help. Like, I feel like that's almost how they have to play Ben Simmons defensively this year, just because they have to have him kind of helping everyone and like rotating off of everyone in order to shut down those driving angles that are going to exist.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see what they do defensively, just because, you know, the past few years it's been the switch everything defense that, you know, Steve got from Mike D'Antoni, who obviously was an assistant his first year. And as you said, I think the roster is a bit better defensively, especially given Ben being healthy. But, you know, Bruce Brown was one of their better on-ball defenders. Obviously, they let him go to Denver without even using their taxpayers exception. I think he's going to be missed on that front. And again, he would have been another nice little wrinkle into the offense with that short roll. But he's gone, and they have, you know, 6 roster spots they can use for training camp. Obviously, you don't carry all those guys going in the regular season, but the kind of guys that they seek out. I mean, there's been rumors about them going after a big, but I mean, who's out there that's going to really change that defensively? DeMarcus Cousins and Tristan Thompson to me would be good veteran additions with playoff experience, but defensively, not much there. So, and also the injury concerns, especially with DeMarcus, given all the injuries this team has had. I don't know who's out there at this point in the market that they could get, but one of the things I wrote too is, they probably got hurt in free agency with some of these guys who just saw what was going on in Brooklyn. Were like, yeah, I'm good. And now all of a sudden they're an attractive destination again. So I think that helps them at this stage in the market, but I just don't know who's out there that can really, kind of going back to my Pat Bev point, but as you said, he's a good fit for what the Lakers need. I don't know who's defensive oriented out there and that should have already had a job by now that's worth going after that can help them with that. So what they try to do to hide that, as you said, and is there anyone that maybe is a pleasant surprise for them defensively? I wouldn't expect Cam Thomas to be that guy, or David Duke is only so big. He's limited, I feel like, in who he could switch on to if he were to re-sign in that two-way spot or whoever. I don't know where else they can really upgrade in that department. And again, they only have Day'Ron and Nick as their true bigs on the roster. So you have to assume they're going to add another center or something like that. And again, the defensive part remains the most interesting thing with them to me, because offensively, even the past few years, it can run itself.
Well, and the annoying thing for them is so Miles Turner just immediately stands out as someone who has a similar size contract to Joe Harris and maybe is available potentially. The problem is they can't move any picks because they have a pick this year.
Swap with Houston, yes.
Yeah, they don't have a 2024. They have a swap in 2025. They don't have a 2026. And then
they have
a
27 from Philly. Yeah.
Yeah, they have
two. They used the 23 in the O'Neal trade.
Yeah. So they theoretically, I guess, could move out a way future pick, but I don't think I want to do that if I'm them, knowing that this entire thing could go to shit very quickly if things break wrong. So yeah, I don't know if they're getting a difference maker, but there are typically enough bigs on the market. Yeah, go ahead, sign Tristan Thompson. It makes, I don't know how much of a difference maker he'd be, but he'd at least be a veteran that exists. I do wonder if there is someone out there though where they could maybe find the right guy.
Yeah, I'm curious if they make a trade, who would go, because Joe Harris has the most money in terms of salary that could bring back an impact person, as you said. I was told throughout the summer they're not trading Joe Harris. He's the team's longest tenured player.
They love Joe. They love him.
I think they would try. Yeah. The one interesting one to me, and Patty Mills goes way back with Sean Marks. Obviously, the Nets are like Spurs East, given the ties to the organizations. Seth Curry's in his last year of his deal. It's a great team-friendly deal, and he was huge for them last year, especially when Joe was absent. He's the one I wonder about, but he's only making, I think, $8.5 million this year, so you can't really get a ton back. And they've let some of their exceptions expire. I think the only one they have left is a $1.6 million exception, which obviously isn't going to get you much anyway. So I don't know what they do with all that, but to me, if I had to pick and the other thing about Patty Mills, aside from the Spurs ties, he's known Ben Simmons' family since they were all in Australia together. So
I would not move Patty Mills, and for what it's worth, I think they can't move Patty Mills until December at least, right?
Yeah, they re-signed him, and again, I think Patty is too key. Sean in that May press conference, going back to, we talked about culture guys. Patty Mills is maybe, along with Joe, two of the best culture guys on the team, and I think that there was a void of that the past few years. I think Jeff Green was someone that's really missed in the locker room last year, because if you look at the roster, he played with just about everybody beforehand, including James Harden, Blake Griffin. He was the guy during that crazy 2020-21 season when they signed somebody. He goes, look, here's how you play alongside each of these guys, in addition to being a locker room presence. So I feel like if a shooter were to be traded, Seth Curry's the odd man out. But again, going back to your point, asset-wise, they just don't – I mean, there was the report before the draft, Cam Thomas was on the market for a first-round pick. They didn't get that deal, obviously. So I don't really know what else you move in terms of getting a deal done to bring back someone. As you said, Miles Turner makes a lot of sense. I'm trying to think who else off the top of my head, but there's
I mean,
just not a lot out there.
Here's a name I would give you. Like, does Daniel Tice make sense? Like, because Daniel Tice's deal lines up pretty closely with Seth Curry. I wonder if that could be one where, like, look, Boston has a ton of bigs, obviously, Robert Williams, Al Horford. Maybe Tice could actually help Brooklyn. And if, maybe they want shooting with Seth Curry, something like that. Like, I think Seth Curry's a better basketball player than Daniel Tice, but I wonder if, like, they just find that they desperately need the, like, big inside that can be reliable on defense.
Yeah, that's an interesting name. I could see that happening. I'm trying to think. He's the only one that I can think of off the top of my head with that kind of salary and everything that would make sense from a fit and money perspective. After that, you got to start getting creative, whether it's a 3-team deal or because even, we talked about the Miles Turner thing. Hypothetically, you couldn't swing straight up. You need to attach some assets, especially I think on the Nets end for a Miles Turner, Russell Westbrook, Joe Harris 3-team deal or something like that. You need some more ornaments to probably get that something like that in the works. So
here's one more is Nerlens Noel. His deal's actually pretty close as well. That could work.
He's the defensive oriented big too, as you said. I mean, Nick Claxton's becoming that, but further along, I think you'd get Nerlens Noel as that. So that one makes more sense to me in terms of just they don't need an offensive guy, defensive oriented. I think he's been relatively healthy over the years, so I think he
Nerlens has not been relatively healthy, unfortunately. But
yeah, I'm trying. He hasn't crossed paths much since, obviously, outside of the Knicks. I haven't seen much of him, especially when he was on the Thunder and everything. But from the defensive and the rim protection standpoint, which they've really lacked, especially, I think that he would help them there.
Especially if they want to be a little bit more switchable, because Nerlens does have real foot speed, like the ability to protect the rim. He's better in a drop coverage setting now, but he has the capability of at least running a switch scheme if necessary. Yeah, like that. They have some options on the market for bigs, basically, if they really want one. And I'm excited about this Nets team. Now the question is, like, how quickly could this go to shit? And if it goes to shit, like, do we just see, like, Kyrie move? Do we see Kevin move in the offseason? Like, it feels like Kevin probably will be there for a year at least, right? Like, it feels like moving forward, like, they're not going to swing a mid-season trade for Kevin Durant, because that feels almost like impossible given what their ask was this year in the offseason for Kevin Durant. So I don't know, man. Like, I'm excited about this Nets team. Like, this could be like a nobody believes in us Nets team. Like, there could be some real, like, mentality. Like, I don't know, man. I'm in. I'm excited about this Nets team.